Hi guys, this is John from World Organic News. Got a bit of a bonus episode for you. It's episode 4 from season 2 of the RegenEarth podcast that I co-host with my colleague Rich Bowden. This one's on heirlooms and why you should grow them. So have a listen and then click over to regenearth.net to have a look at the website, or go to your favourite podcatcher and subscribe there. So without any further ado, here it is, Season 2, Episode 4, Heirlooms.
Hello folks, and welcome to Episode 4 of Season 2 of RegenEarth. I'm your co-host Rich Bowden, and I can hear friend and co-host John Morritt in his Highclere Regen Farm studios. John, welcome to the show.
Hello, one and all.
Okay, John, we have covered quite a bit of ground so far. Backyard veggies and herbs in our 2 previous shows. And this time we've got a bit of a different slant. It's connected, but slightly different. It's about, I think we touched on it last week, John, just slightly, and we're going into it a little bit more deeper this week. The question is, what are heirlooms and how do I grow them? So let's start with the first part of that. What are heirlooms? John?
They're the things your nan gives you when you get married.
Yes.
In your glory box.
Sewing kits and things like that.
Yes. Tapestry outfits.
Anti-macassar, yeah.
Heirloom.
Okay, John.
Heirloom refers to heirloom seeds. The grandmother connection wasn't all that far off, actually, because they're the varieties our grandparents, great-grandparents and whatnot further back grew in their backyards. So in a sense, they're just traditional seeds, like Granddad used to sow, my granddad anyway. Other people that have kept hold of a lot of them are Italians, the Greeks, Maltese, Lebanese, basically anyone who came from the Mediterranean to Australia managed to somehow get through quarantine with pockets full of seeds. But the other thing with heirloom seeds is that they're open pollinated. Now, to go explain that a bit more, I'll explain what they're not. Most of the seeds you get from commercial seed suppliers in Bunnings and places like Yates or whatever, they're hybridised. So they're 2 cultivars that have been crossed together to give you a seed that'll grow fast, be drought resistant or whatever. Now, if you try and regrow those seeds, then like you save them after your season and try to regrow them, they'll revert to type, which means you'll get half of them will be growing up as one part of the hybrid and the other half will return to the other half of the hybrid. Now, that's a simple hybrid cross, an F1, but a lot of the commercial seeds used by farmers and whatnot have got 7, 8, 9, 10 crosses in them. So if you try and save those seeds and regrow them, you'll get God knows what. The heirloom seeds, you can save the seed and it will regrow. It's a bit like breeds of dog, that sort of thing, but they're plants. So if you cross an Alsatian with an Alsatian, you'll get an Alsatian. If you cross an Alsatian with a pug, you'll get a monstrosity. Yes. I don't know why I came up with those breeds. But if you sow an heirloom variety of tomatoes, say mortgage lifter, and you save the seeds from that, you know that the ones you plant next year will grow up and give you exactly the same sort of tomatoes.
Okay, yeah.
So then, now, the reason people grow hybrids is that they're normally more productive. There's a thing called hybrid vigour. We use it in animal husbandry, putting, say, Suffolk rams over crossbred ewes to get much bigger, meatier lambs. The trouble is you cannot then use the offspring of the hybrids to regrow. So that's the downside. So you might not be as productive with the heirlooms. I'd argue that you would. And the other advantage heirlooms have is that they've got a wider genetic base. So if you think of plants germinating, the time it takes them to germinate from planting, and you get some early, most in the middle and some at the end, it's a bell curve shape. Now, the bell curve for heirlooms is a little bit wider and a little bit shallower, whereas the hybrid ones are very narrow and very high. So if you get a late frost and you've got heirlooms in, you're normally going to get some that are coming up a little bit later so that you'll still get a crop and they'll fill in the gap. Whereas with a hybrid crop, you can lose the lot in one go. Which, so, and I think that the genetic variation and the fact that the seasons are a little bit variable these days means you've got more chance of getting something to grow to harvest with heirlooms than you would with hybrids, unless you hit a perfect season for the hybrids and they're bred to conditions that are quite narrow. Yeah, I would go with the heirlooms, obviously.
Yeah, and I think, John, your point that you made earlier was a very good one, that as far as Australia is concerned, we have a huge debt that we owe to Mediterranean immigrants. Yeah, Lebanese, Maltese, Greeks, Italians, they all brought the traditional varieties in, and they were able to grow them in an Australian climate, and that sort of kicked off, I think, a lot of the varieties that we've got in tomatoes. There's one story I can remember. My brother's married into a Maltese family, a lovely people, and I was talking to my brother's father-in-law. He came out I think in the 50s, not quite sure, but somewhere around the 50s, one of the early migrations from Malta to Australia. And he said in those days it was getting any sort of Mediterranean cuisine was off the table. I mean, everything that Australians ate was meat and 2 veg, meat and 3 veg, or a traditional British-style cuisine, with the exception of probably the maybe Chinese that was sort of tolerated. And he told me the story of going down, I think it was down to Wollongong for the day with his wife. They'd just newly arrived in Australia. They went to a cafe and they asked for just a plate of pasta. and the guy just went and got one of those tin cans. I don't know if you remember growing up with those on there. Spaghetti. And just ripped open the tin can and poured it on their plate. That was his version of pasta. There was no such thing as tomato sauce. And
that would have been pre-microwave too. So
I think it would have. Can you imagine that?
Cold tin spaghetti on toast.
It would have been a nightmare. But yeah, coming from a Maltese cuisine where that's prior to, but getting back to the point, a lot of the seeds were brought over with these Mediterranean immigrants, including my wife's family from Lebanon. I love putting their own vegetables in their backyards, particularly tomatoes. But those particular tomatoes, John, when we talk about hybrids, they have been interbred, haven't they, throughout history? So,
yes, but they get localised. People find a variety with a characteristic they like, and they just keep selecting.
A bit more cold tolerant, perhaps, and
the size or whatever, or the flavour. And if you keep selecting for one trait, eventually you just get the seeds that throw that trait. It was mostly hit and miss until it became a science, but you can actually select for them now. And the plant breeders have done amazing things with that. But there was an awful lot of different tomato varieties here too before the war. I remember seeing an old catalogue, and it's not that the Mediterranean saved us so much as we destroyed a lot of the old ones ourselves.
Okay.
When people started going to supermarkets and buying through them rather than growing their own. So there was a wave of replacements, but there's still people, that was at Diggers Club and Eden Seeds and places like that, that enormous varieties, and they can trace them back, 100 years or so, as well as to overseas. And that tomato is just one example. If you think of the varieties of cabbage, and lettuce and things like that, and of course you got the Chinese cabbages, which are far more numerous even, because they've been through lots of famines and they need stuff that grows quickly, and they've got a lot of people to feed. But even turnips, and I think we've mentioned radishes before on the show.
Yes, yeah.
There's any number of radishes, 300 or 400 varieties I know I've seen in some catalogues. But the opportunity's out there for you to grow heirlooms. I'd recommend it. like you were saying last week, they're not selected for transport, Rich. They're selected for flavour more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Our interview, John, with Catherine Lockley, talking about heirlooms was quite fascinating. This was for the Regen Backyard Conference that we ran. I think it was in September last year, John.
Indeed.
The interest and the passion there, and I've spoken to Catherine a bit more about heirlooms, and she's recommended to me a small seed company that she uses, and I'll give them a free plug here. I'm not making any money out of this, John. They're called Boondie Seeds, B-O-O-N-D-I-E, and I have used some of the stuff. It's very good. You don't get a large amount, as you normally don't with heirloom tomatoes, but you get enough for a backyard context. And, John, that a lot of people that are listening, we aim this show at backyards and regen backyards. So the second part of the question, and I think we've covered about what are heirlooms, but how do people grow them in a backyard context?
Pretty much the way you grow any standard variety. You just have to know your first and last frosts if you're having those in your area.
Yeah.
Basically, you don't need any specialised information. I'd be doing companion planting with. I do that anyway. I think that's an upcoming episode too in a little while.
Okay.
And yeah, they're hardy. They're strong. I've never had any trouble with them. You know, they just treat them like I was trained to grow any seeds.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, John, to watch and see heirloom varieties. I grew an heirloom broccoli. I remember that was called Romanescu. And it comes out, it looks like a minaret. It looks like the top of a minaret. The only difference is you cut it and you eat it once rather than other broccoli where you can cut it and then eat the side shoots. So I think that's the only down part. But the taste, John, the taste was amazing.
Something about the flavour, is it, Rich?
I think that was it, yeah. And just the thought that it had been bred, and been used for centuries in Europe, perhaps.
Well, very similar to that, I grew some Hopi blue corn. So,
yes.
The bright yellow sweet corn most people grow in their backyards if they're growing corn.
Yes.
This is a flower corn, and so you've got to let it go all the way to maturity and let the seeds set to like concrete, and then I had a grain mill I ran them through. But they were selected to survive into a cool, damp autumn. And by the time they were ready to be harvested, all the stalks and leaves were covered in rust and rot and were falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
But the seed came good, and we got more than, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, probably more than that, our seed back. And it made the most magnificent pancakes and bread. Not on of course. Yes, I believe you had some of it, yes.
I was just going to say, I do remember a dinner party we got invited to, which was fantastic at Shipley, at the Shipley farm. And that was, I can remember the blue pancakes and thinking, what is this? It is the taste, isn't it? It's just the amazing.
Magnificent taste, yeah. With the pancakes, you mix it in, it just looks a bit bluish.
Yep.
And then when you add the liquid to it, it turns violet. I think hooks off back down to blue as it dries. Yes. And it's got, because of these older things have got wider variation, wider genetic base, and they've been selected for people to live on. You get odd things happening, like with the blue corn, it has lysine in it, which is a protein that's not normally associated with corn. And so it has advantages for people that are being vegetarian or vegan in their choices.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other good source for lysine, of course, is red meat.
Yeah.
But, so look around and have a read. I mean, there's plenty of info on Google. You've just got to use your critical thinking skills.
Yep.
To not go too far with some claims. But there were papers I read that had found the lysine in this stuff. And it was one of the marketing things. They were using it for blue corn tortilla chips in the States. So,
Yep.
Yeah, and I remember grinding it a bit thicker and then using it as a crumb base for chicken.
Yes.
And it was, nothing like I've ever tasted. Yeah,
it's funny how, I was just going to say, John, it's funny how heirloom seeds, heirloom vegetables have come right back into almost the mainstream, haven't they? Mm. And I think it's that people are just saying they're finally sick of the plasticky sort of taste that you get from supermarkets, and they want to go back to the original taste. They've read about it, perhaps they've read books, they've looked online, as you say, and they wouldn't try for themselves. And that's what we encourage our listeners to do. All you need is a little patch in the backyard. Get yourself some heirloom seeds. Look at the local seed company if you can. Speaking of seed companies, John, is it best to be, say, like if you get heirlooms from a seed company that's in the same climate zone as you? So that
would seem to make sense, but I get mine from, and I have no financial arrangement with these people. I get them from
plug away.
Eden Seeds that are up in Queensland.
Yes,
I got them from there when we were in the Blue Mountains, and 1,000 metres above sea level and 1,000 metres further south, away from the equator.
Yeah.
But they do specialise in short season, like 90 days growing season plants. So I grow rock melons that were about 2/3 of the size of a standard one, but they'd be in and out before the next frost. So while it would be, you can see the sense in buying seeds from people that live nearby, reputable seed producers will provide seeds for any climate zone. The other thing, of course, is to talk to neighbours, grab some seeds off them, particularly if they're of Mediterranean extraction, or they've been in the locale for, since settlement sometimes.
Yeah.
The same spuds have been passed down for 150 years or whatever.
Yes, and they're local. They're bred for local consumption, and they work very well for local conditions.
And they've adapted to the local climate, so things that wouldn't have, like that part of the bell curve of the seeds that wasn't suited to that area, haven't reproduced. So they didn't pass on their genes. So the stuff that you've got there has. And that's the other thing. Once you start using heirlooms and selecting the ones you want, you're also selecting seed for your local microclimate. Now, it's not going to make much difference in sort of 1, 2, 5 years, but the longer you do it, the more adapted to the local area your seeds are.
Yes.
And there was a huge library of seeds lost in the 60s and 70s, not just here in Australia, but across the world, as the Green Revolution was rolled out. Which is sort of a misnomer because it's based on chemicals and fertilisers and pesticides.
I just wonder if you could just go into the Green Revolution just for a minute there, John.
Yep. I mean, it's the fellow who developed the process of being able to grow mountains of food quickly did so because there were famines across Africa and India and other parts of Asia in the 60s. So his idea was to feed the world quickly with this stuff and then revert back to more traditional methods. He saw it as a stopgap. Trouble is, people drank the Kool-Aid. Government extension advisors came out, told people to rip out all their old-fashioned, useless seeds. Government had taken them away and burned them, or they were told to burn them. And these new wonder seed, and they did produce a lot quickly, but there's always a cost. You get nothing for nothing in nature. And so all these locally adapted, microclimate adapted varieties and things that grew in one valley but wouldn't grow in the next one over, particularly with rice varieties.
John, I read a really good book called, I think it was The End of Plenty by a writer called Byrne, and he talked about the Green Revolution. And one of the things that he mentioned was I think you've already raised the point about the loss of diversity, and his study was mostly on India, and he said that Indian farmers had their own seeds for, depending on where they lived, they'd raised seeds through the centuries, handed down through generations. That was all lost with the Green Revolution, and it was big companies like Monsanto that really destroyed that. And I just wonder if you can get your comment on that.
Which is why, of course, when we talked back in season 1, I think episode 3, about Vavilov and the seed libraries and seed banks, why they're so important. But, there was a lot of locally adapted variation that was just lost. There wasn't time to get seeds from each tiny, when I say tiny, I'm on 1.5 acres.
Yeah.
A lot of the farms were not much bigger than that anyway. And so each one had its own variation. And there'd have been some cross-pollination and whatnot from paddock to paddock. But, yeah, a lot of that stuff was lost. Apparently there used to be a variety of rice that grew with the floods and would grow up to 20 foot so that it still had 2 leaves above the water and wasn't destroyed by the rot. And then as soon as the flood went, it'd just keep growing. It wouldn't give you as much return, but there were other benefits. You had all the extra rice straw that you could use for bedding or to feed the livestock or whatever. And that doesn't fit in well with the combine harvest method.
Yeah.
But they didn't have any in this particular valley anyway. It was all done by hand. So you can see why a lot of things were lost. But once you start planting your own heirlooms, you restart the process of local adaptation. And it's critical. And having a wide genetic base, as we all know with the climate changing, it's important to have that safety net. So, because no 2 summers are the same. Hopefully, especially the mainland doesn't get a summer like the one we're living through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But who's to know? I mean, it was much hotter here last year, and then this time of the year now I'm walking around in a jumper and a beanie outside. So you need things that have got more capacity to deal with variations in weather. Now, some extremes in weather, nothing will survive. Nothing grows in dust. That's what happens with a drought. Eventually something grows in mud if you get too much rain. But I'm a big fan of heirlooms. I think they're one of our safety nets as we go through this change. And, of course, they've been growing for so long that when we finally get our act together and start decarbonising the air and recarbonising the soil and get the temperatures back to where they should be, heirlooms will still work there. They've got that wide variation. They can deal with more climate variation or weather variation for that matter too.
Right.
There you go, rant over. I feel better now.
Not a rant. Very interesting as always, John. Thank you very much for covering that. Just in quick summary for our listeners, just what we covered, just quickly, how would you go about starting off an heirloom garden in your backyard?
Well, you'd do the no-dig, obviously, because I'm a big no-dig fan.
Okay.
You'd go to your seed catalogue, providing you haven't got seeds off your neighbours. We go to your seed catalogue and just pick a few things that look interesting in each cultivar, so each vegetable type. So you get 3 or 4 different tomatoes and 3 or 4 different turnips, if turnips are your thing, different pea varieties, and just see how they go in your area. It's sweet corn's different, or maize of any sort, because you've got to have different patches 100 metres apart, otherwise they'll cross-pollinate. But, yeah, you can do it over 3 or 4 years with the corn. I know a fellow that was growing popcorn 1 year and then sweet corn the next. And his seed, so he was able to save his seed for the 2 years without it going off, just kept it in a tin with that was sealed after he dried the seeds out properly. Think about what it is you want to grow, find a reputable supplier and make sure they're all open pollinated and just give it a go.
And you won't be disappointed. The taste sensation, and I'm not exaggerating there, listeners. No. Yeah. Unbelievable. All right, as always, I've learned a lot this episode. Thank you very much, John, for talking us through heirloom seeds. And
my pleasure.
I hope you got something out of the show. We've really enjoyed bringing it to you. So thank you very much for listening. And John will have everything in the show notes. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening. And there you have it, listeners. Season 2, Episode 4 from the RegenEarth podcast. Hope you found it enlightening. Don't forget to subscribe to RegenEarth on the podcatcher of your choice. And I'll be back next week, as usual, with World Organic News. See you then.